The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the quiet town of Ridgewood. Sarah Mitchell tightened her grip on the leashes of her two German shepherds, Max and Luna, as she stepped out of her car. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and grilled food, a mix that seemed fitting for a place known more for its rough edges than charm. She had been driving all day and decided to stop at a small diner on the outskirts of town to grab a bite before continuing her journey. Sarah was no stranger to stares. Her military uniform, paired with the presence of her dogs, often drew attention wherever she went. But there was something different about the way people looked at her here. As she approached the entrance of the diner, the chatter inside suddenly died down. Heads turned, eyes locked onto her, and whispers began to ripple through the room. Most of the patrons were bikers, big burly men with leather jackets covered in patches that hinted at lives lived hard and fast. She ignored the curious glances and walked toward an empty booth near the window. Max and Luna followed obediently, their paws clicking softly against the tile floor. They settled beside her, calm but alert, their trained instincts always on high alert. Sarah ordered a burger and some water for herself and her companions. It wasn't long before the murmurs grew louder, turning into outright laughter from a group of bikers sitting at the bar. One of them stood out, a tall, muscular man with a scruffy beard and tattoos running up his arms. His voice boomed above the rest. "Well, look what we got here," he said, pointing at Sarah, a little lady playing soldier. "And with those mutts too." His friends chuckled, clearly entertained by his antics. Another biker chimed in. "Yeah, you think those dogs can actually do anything besides wag their tails." Sarah kept her composure, not letting their words faze her. She focused instead on feeding Max and Luna, who were watching the scene unfold with keen interest. Still, the mocking continued. One of the bikers leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I've seen real handlers," he sneered. "You don't look like one of them." Despite their jeers, Sarah remained silent, choosing to let her actions speak for themselves later, if it came to that. For now, she simply enjoyed her meal, savoring each bite while keeping a close eye on her loyal companions. Deep down, though, she knew trouble might be brewing. These men weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone like her. And yet, Sarah couldn't help but feel a spark of determination ignite within her. If they wanted a show, she was ready to give them one, but only if they pushed too far. As the tension simmered quietly beneath the surface, Sarah glanced around the room. Some of the other diners avoided meeting her gaze, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Others watched eagerly, wondering how, or if, she would respond. Little did anyone know, this encounter was about to take a turn none of them expected. The diner's atmosphere grew thicker with tension as the bikers' laughter echoed off the walls. Sarah could feel their eyes boring into her, sizing her up like predators circling prey. She took another bite of her burger, chewing slowly to mask the storm brewing inside her. Max and Luna sat quietly by her side, their ears twitching at every insult thrown their way. They weren't growling or barking, yet, but their bodies were coiled tight, ready to spring into action at her command. Razor, the loud-mouthed biker with the scruffy beard, wasn't done poking fun. He leaned forward on the bar counter, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hey, sweetheart," he called out, drawing even more attention to himself. "You sure those dogs are trained? Or are they just here for cuddles?" His friends erupted in laughter again, slapping the table and shaking their heads. One of them chimed in, "Yeah, maybe she thinks carrying a leash makes her tough." Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she reached down to stroke Max's head, her fingers brushing against his thick fur. The gesture was calming, for both her and the dog, but it also sent a subtle message to the bikers. These animals were under her complete control. Razor noticed the interaction and smirked, clearly unimpressed. "Aw, how cute," he said sarcastically. "But let me tell you something. If I wanted to, I could walk right over there and take those leashes from you." At that moment, a few heads turned toward Razor, not out of agreement but out of disbelief. Even some of his own gang members exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone in the room knew what military canines were capable of, and while Razor might have been trying to sound brave, his words carried an edge of recklessness. Still, Sarah didn't rise to the bait. She simply smiled faintly, almost pityingly, which only seemed to infuriate Razor further. "Come on," he pressed, his tone growing sharper. "Prove it. Show us what your little pets can do." He gestured dramatically around the room, playing to the crowd. "Or are you all bark and no bite, just like them?" The other bikers cheered him on, egging him to push harder. A few even started placing bets among themselves, whispering about whether Sarah would back down or actually try to demonstrate her dog skills. By now, the entire diner had become a stage, with everyone watching to see what would happen next. Some of the quieter patrons looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats as the tension escalated. Others appeared entertained, eager to witness a showdown. Sarah remained unfazed, finishing her meal without haste. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and calm, cutting through the noise like a knife. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said, meeting Razor's gaze directly. Her words hung in the air, silencing the room momentarily. But before anyone could react, Razor shot back. "That's because you know they can't do squat." His bravado was relentless, and the pressure in the room intensified. Luna let out a low, rumbling growl, her lips curling slightly to reveal sharp teeth. It was enough to make a few people nearest to her scoot their chairs back nervously. Sarah placed a gentle hand on Luna's neck, signaling her to stay calm. The message was clear. The dogs were holding back. For now. Razor either didn't notice or didn't care. He leaned back, crossing his arms smugly. "Go ahead, lady," he taunted. "Show us what you've got. Unless you're scared." Sarah's jaw tightened ever so slightly, but she kept her cool. Deep down, she knew this wasn't about proving herself to a group of rowdy bikers. This was about standing firm in the face of disrespect and showing that her dogs, and she herself, deserved respect. And as much as she wanted to teach them a lesson, she also knew better than to act impulsively. For now, she would wait, letting the tension build until the moment was right. As the standoff continued, one thing became certain. Whatever happened next would leave a lasting impression on everyone in that diner. The challenge hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unavoidable. Razor's smirk widened as he leaned forward, his elbows resting on the bar counter. "All right, here's the deal," he announced loudly, making sure everyone in the diner could hear him. "If your dogs are as tough as you say they are, let's see him take down one of my boys." He gestured to the group of bikers behind him, who immediately started volunteering, or rather, shoving each other aside, to be the guinea pig. Sarah raised an eyebrow, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to respond right away. The weight of the moment spoke for itself. The room buzzed with anticipation, some patrons exchanging nervous glances, while others grinned excitedly at the prospect of a spectacle. Razor, sensing he had the upper hand, pressed further. "If your mutts can actually do something impressive, I'll buy dinner for everyone here. But if they flop," he paused dramatically, letting the threat linger, "then you leave. No arguments." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people seemed hesitant, unsure whether this was a good idea, while others egged Razor on, cheering and clapping. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She knew Max and Luna were more than capable of handling whatever Razor threw their way, but she also understood the risks of escalating the situation. These weren't just ordinary dogs. They were highly trained military animals, and things could get out of hand quickly if not managed properly. Still, something inside her stirred. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about showing these men that underestimating someone based on gender or appearance was a mistake they'd regret. With a slow, deliberate nod, Sarah accepted the challenge. "Fine," she said evenly, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "But remember, you asked for this." Razor laughed, clearly amused by her confidence. "Oh, we're gonna enjoy this." He shot back, turning to his gang to pick the unlucky volunteer. After a brief scuffle, a hulking biker named Tank stepped forward. His massive frame towered over everyone else in the room, and his arms bulged with muscles beneath his leather jacket. He cracked his knuckles and flexed his biceps, clearly relishing the attention. "These dogs better be ready," he growled, flashing a cocky grin. "'Cause I ain't gonna go easy on 'em." The crowd erupted into cheers and jeers, the energy in the room reaching a fever pitch. Sarah remained calm, crouching down beside Max and Luna to give them quiet instructions. Her hands moved gently over their fur as she whispered commands, her voice firm but soothing. Both dogs listened intently, their bodies tense with anticipation. They trusted her completely, knowing she would never put them in harm's way without reason. As preparations continued, Razor turned to address the growing audience. "Listen up, folks," he bellowed, raising his arms like a ringmaster at a circus. "We're about to see if this girl and her so-called military dogs have what it takes to back up their big talk. Place your bets now, because once this starts, there's no turning back." The bikers roared in approval, slapping each other on the back and shouting playful jibes at Sarah. Despite the noise and chaos, Sarah stayed focused, her eyes locked on Tank. She noticed how he shifted his weight from foot to foot, clearly trying to appear intimidating. What he didn't realize was that every movement he made, the way he stood, the tension in his shoulders, was being analyzed by both her and her dogs. To Max and Zen, he wasn't just a burly biker. He was a target, plain and simple. With everything set, the group spilled outside to an open lot behind the diner. The space was dusty and uneven, surrounded by parked motorcycles and scattered trash. A makeshift circle formed as spectators gathered around, eager to see what would happen next. Razor crossed his arms, looking smug, while Tank cracked his neck and rolled his shoulders, preparing for whatever was coming his way. Sarah stood calmly at the edge of the circle, Max and Luna by her side. She gave them one last command, her tone soft but commanding. "Stay sharp," she murmured, her gaze unwavering. The dogs responded instantly, their ears perked and their eyes laser-focused on Tank. For a brief moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then Razor raised his hand, signaling the start of the demonstration, and the real test began. The open lot behind the diner buzzed with energy as the crowd formed a loose circle around Sarah, Max, Luna, and Tank. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the dusty ground. Razor stood at the edge of the crowd, his arms crossed and a smug grin plastered across his face. He was clearly enjoying himself, convinced that this little demonstration would end in embarrassment for Sarah. Tank, meanwhile, cracked his knuckles one last time and flexed his muscles, trying to look as intimidating as possible. Sarah remained calm, her focus unshaken. She crouched beside Max and Luna, giving them quiet instructions. Her voice was low and steady, almost soothing, but her commands carried an unmistakable authority. "Watch him," she whispered, pointing subtly at Tank. "Stay close." Both dogs responded immediately, their bodies coiled tight like springs, ready to move at her signal. Their eyes never left Tank, tracking his every movement with precision. Tank shifted uncomfortably under their gaze. For all his bravado, he couldn't shake the feeling that something about these dogs felt different. Most dogs he'd encountered were either playful or skittish, but Max and Luna radiated an intensity that made his skin crawl. Still, he wasn't about to back down now. Not in front of his gang. Not in front of everyone watching. "All right, let's get this over with," he muttered, rolling his shoulders again. Razor raised his hand high above his head, drawing the attention of the crowd. "Ready?" he shouted, his voice booming over the murmurs of anticipation. Everyone fell silent, their eyes glued to the scene unfolding before them. With a dramatic flourish, Razor dropped his hand. "Go." At first, nothing happened. Tank stood still, waiting for the dogs to make a move. But Max and Luna didn't charge forward recklessly. They were trained professionals, not wild animals. Instead, they began circling him slowly, their movements fluid and deliberate. They stayed low to the ground, their teeth bared just enough to show they meant business. The sound of their growls sent shivers through the onlookers, even the toughest bikers among them. Tank tried to keep up with their movements, turning awkwardly to face whichever dog was closest. But it quickly became clear that he was outmatched. Every time he focused on one, the other would dart in closer, snapping playfully at his boots or brushing against his legs. The crowd gasped and laughed nervously, unsure whether to cheer or feel sorry for him. Some of the bikers exchanged uneasy glances, realizing too late that this might not go the way they expected. "Come on, do something," Razor shouted from the sidelines. Growing impatient, his confidence wavered slightly when he saw how effortlessly Max and Luna worked together. They weren't just random pets. They were a team, perfectly synchronized and utterly fearless. Tank, frustrated and flustered, decided to take matters into his own hands. He lunged toward Luna, hoping to scare her off with his sheer size. But before he could even touch her, Max sprang into action. In a flash, the German Shepherd leaped forward, positioning himself between Tank and Luna. His loud, thunderous bark echoed through the lot, stopping Tank dead in his tracks. Even the rowdiest members of the crowd went silent, stunned by the ferocity of the sound. Luna joined in, circling behind Tank and nipping lightly at his heels. Tank stumbled backward, caught off guard by the sudden coordination of the two dogs. His bravado crumbled as he realized he was completely surrounded. He glanced toward Razor for help, but Razor just shrugged, unwilling or unable to intervene. Sarah watched silently from the sidelines, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to give any commands. Max and Luna knew exactly what to do. They pressed closer, their growls growing louder, until Tank was backed into the center of the circle with nowhere to go. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Tank raised his hands defensively, his earlier confidence replaced by wide-eyed panic. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, Sarah gave a sharp whistle. Max and Luna froze instantly, their ears perking up at the sound. Without hesitation, they retreated to her side, sitting obediently at her feet. The transformation was immediate. They went from fierce predators to calm, well-behaved companions in the blink of an eye. The crowd erupted into applause, some people cheering wildly while others stared in awe at the display of discipline and skill. Tank stood frozen for a moment, his face flushed with embarrassment. Finally, he muttered something under his breath and backed away, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Razor looked equally stunned, his earlier smirk replaced by a scowl. Sarah didn't gloat or rub it in. She simply patted Max and Luna on their heads, thanking them quietly for a job well done. The lesson had been taught, and respect had been earned. The air in the lot was electric, charged with a mix of awe and disbelief. Tank stood frozen in the center of the circle, his massive frame now dwarfed by the presence of Max and Luna. His bravado had evaporated completely, leaving behind only wide-eyed panic. Beads of sweat formed on his forehead as he raised both hands high above his head, signaling surrender. All right, he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm done. You win." Sarah gave another sharp whistle, her tone firm but calm. Instantly, Max and Luna retreated to her side, their bodies relaxing as they sat obediently at her feet. The transformation was remarkable. Just moments ago, they had been fierce, calculating predators, and now they were docile companions, their tails wagging gently as if nothing unusual had happened. The crowd erupted into applause, some people cheering wildly while others whistled or clapped in admiration. Tank shuffled awkwardly out of the circle, avoiding eye contact with anyone. His face was flushed red, a mix of embarrassment and lingering fear written all over it. Razor, who had been so confident just moments earlier, looked visibly shaken. His arms were still crossed, but his smug grin had disappeared entirely. Instead, He stared at Sarah and her dogs with a mixture of disbelief and begrudging respect. Even the rowdiest bikers in the group exchanged glances, their earlier mockery replaced by stunned silence. Sarah didn't say a word as she knelt down to check on Max and Luna. She ran her hands over their fur, ensuring they were calm and unharmed after the demonstration. Her movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial, as though she wanted everyone to see how much trust and care existed between her and her dogs. The crowd watched intently, many of them leaning forward to get a better look. Some even whispered among themselves, marveling at the precision and discipline the dogs had displayed. "You weren't kidding," one biker finally said, breaking the silence. His voice carried a note of genuine surprise, and maybe even a hint of admiration. Another chimed in, "Man, I've never seen anything like that before." Slowly but surely, the mood shifted. The hostility that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by curiosity and respect. A few bikers approached Sarah cautiously, their earlier arrogance softened by what they had just witnessed. One of them, a grizzled older man with a long gray beard, stepped forward and extended his hand. "That was impressive," he admitted, his tone gruff but sincere. "We might have underestimated you and your dogs." Sarah accepted the handshake without hesitation, her expression neutral but polite. "They're trained for situations far more intense than this," she replied simply, her words carrying a quiet authority. "But they're also loyal partners. They protect me, and I protect them." Razor, still standing near the edge of the crowd, cleared his throat awkwardly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wad of cash, counting out enough bills to cover dinner for everyone in the diner. As he handed the money to Sarah, he muttered something under his breath that sounded vaguely like an apology. She didn't press him for more. Instead, she nodded curtly and tucked the money away. The rest of the bikers began dispersing slowly, some heading back toward their motorcycles, while others lingered to ask Sarah questions about her work and her dogs. She answered patiently, explaining bits and pieces about canine training and the bond between handlers and their animals. Max and Luna stayed close by her side, occasionally earning pats on the head from curious onlookers who were now eager to show affection rather than disdain. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Sarah finally turned to leave. The confrontation had ended not with anger or aggression, but with understanding, and perhaps even a lesson learned. For the first time since she'd walked into the diner, no one mocked her or doubted her abilities. Instead, they watched her go with a newfound appreciation for the woman and her extraordinary dogs. As the crowd began to thin out, the mood in the lot shifted from tension to something almost reverent. The bikers who had once mocked Sarah now approached her with a mix of curiosity and humility. Razor, still holding the wad of cash he pulled from his pocket, hesitated for a moment before stepping forward. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by an awkwardness that made him seem almost human. "Here," he said gruffly, shoving the money into her hand. "Dinner's on me, like I promised." Sarah accepted the money without comment, her expression calm but unreadable. She didn't gloat or rub their earlier mockery in their faces. Instead, she simply nodded, acknowledging the gesture. It wasn't about the money. It was about the lesson they'd learned. Razor glanced at Max and Luna, who sat quietly by her side, their intelligent eyes watching his every move. "Those dogs, there's something else," he admitted reluctantly, scratching the back of his neck. "Guess we underestimated you." The admission hung in the air, heavy but meaningful. Other bikers echoed similar sentiments, some apologizing outright, while others simply expressed admiration for her skills and the bond she shared with her dogs. One particularly burly biker named Bear stepped forward, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. "I gotta ask," he said, his deep voice tinged with genuine interest. "How do you train him like that?" Those moves were, well, kinda scary. Sarah smiled faintly, sensing the change in tone. For the first time since arriving at the diner, she felt comfortable enough to share a piece of her world with them. "It's not just about training," she explained, kneeling down to stroke Max's head. "It's about trust. These dogs aren't just tools, they're partners. We work together, protect each other." Her words carried weight, and the bikers listened intently, their earlier skepticism replaced by fascination. Luna let out a soft bark, drawing laughter from the group. Even Razor cracked a smile, the tension melting away completely. Another biker, younger than the rest, knelt down cautiously to pet Luna. At first, he hesitated, glancing up at Sarah for permission. When she gave a small nod, he reached out tentatively, his rough hands brushing against Luna's fur. To everyone's surprise, Luna responded warmly, leaning into the touch and wagging her tail gently. The young biker grinned, looking up at his friends. "She's actually pretty sweet." This moment seemed to break the ice entirely. More bikers gathered around, eager to interact with Max and Luna. Sarah stayed close, keeping a watchful eye as they showered her dogs with affection. Despite their intimidating size and fierce reputation, Max and Luna remained calm and patient, clearly enjoying the attention. It was a stark contrast to the controlled intensity they had shown during the demonstration, and it only deepened the bikers' respect for them, and for Sarah. Razor, still standing nearby, cleared his throat again. "Look," he began, his voice softer this time. "We might have been out of line earlier. You handled yourself, and your dogs, better than any of us expected." He paused, glancing at his gang for support. "No hard feelings, all right." Sarah met his gaze steadily, then extended her hand. "No hard feelings," she replied simply. Razor shook her hand firmly, a look of relief crossing his face. The rest of the bikers followed suit, each one offering their own version of an apology or thanks. Some even invited her to join them for dinner at the diner, though she politely declined, citing her long drive ahead. As the sun dipped lower, casting warm golden light over the scene, Sarah prepared to leave. The bikers parted respectfully, making way for her and her dogs. There was no trace of the hostility or mockery that had greeted her earlier, only a newfound camaraderie and mutual respect. As she walked back toward her car, Max and Luna trotting happily beside her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This encounter hadn't been about proving herself, it had been about showing these men that respect is earned, not given freely. And tonight, she had earned it. As Sarah loaded Max and Luna into the back of her car, the bikers lingered nearby, reluctant to let the moment end. What had started as a tense standoff had transformed into something unexpected, a bridge of understanding between two worlds that couldn't have been more different. Razor stood at the edge of the parking lot, watching silently as Sarah secured her dogs. His earlier arrogance was gone, replaced by an almost reflective quietness. For once, he didn't feel the need to dominate the room with his voice or presence. One of the bikers, a wiry man named Spike, approached cautiously, holding out a small scrap of paper. "Hey," he said, his tone unusually soft. "If you're ever in town again, maybe stop by. We'd like to learn more about what you do." He gestured vaguely toward Max and Luna, who were now settled comfortably in the car, their heads resting on the seat. Sarah took the paper, which had a hastily scribbled phone number on it, and nodded. "I'll think about it," she replied, her voice neutral but not unkind. The gesture seemed to open the floodgates. Other bikers began chiming in, asking questions about K9 training and military work. Some wanted to know how long it took to train dogs like Max and Luna, while others were curious about the types of missions they'd been involved in. Sarah answered patiently, careful not to reveal too much about her past assignments, but happy to share general insights. She explained how trust was built over time, how consistency was key, and how every dog had its own unique personality. "They're not machines," she emphasized. "They're living, breathing partners. You have to respect them." Bear, the burly biker with arms covered in tattoos, scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Never thought I'd say this, but I kinda respect what you do," he admitted, his deep voice tinged with sincerity. "You and your dogs, you're a team. That's something we can appreciate. The other bikers murmured in agreement, nodding along. It was clear that the demonstration had left a lasting impression, not just because of the skill Sarah and her dogs had displayed, but because of the bond they shared. As the conversation continued, Sarah noticed a shift in the bikers' demeanor. They weren't just curious, they were inspired. These men, who lived lives defined by strength and toughness, saw something in her and her dogs that resonated deeply: loyalty, discipline, and mutual respect. One biker even joked, "Maybe we should get ourselves some guard dogs like yours. Think they'd listen to us." The group erupted in laughter. The tension from earlier completely dissolved. Before leaving, Sarah turned to face them one last time. "Respect goes both ways," she said firmly, her words carrying weight. "You don't have to agree with someone to treat them fairly. And you don't have to understand what they do to acknowledge their worth." The bikers exchanged glances, her message sinking in. Razor, standing slightly apart from the group, gave a slow nod. "Message received," he muttered, almost to himself. With everything said and done, Sarah climbed into the driver's seat, Max and Luna settling in beside her. As she started the engine, the bikers stepped back, forming a loose line near their motorcycles. To her surprise, they raised their hands in a gesture of farewell, some even saluting her as she pulled away. She returned the gesture with a small wave, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Driving down the quiet road, Sarah reflected on the day's events. She hadn't set out to teach anyone a lesson, but sometimes life handed you opportunities to make a difference, even in small ways. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of twilight. Beside her, Max let out a contented sigh, while Luna rested her chin on the center console, her eyes half closed. Sarah reached over to pat them both affectionately. "You did good today," she whispered, her voice filled with pride. "Real good." And as the car disappeared into the distance, the memory of what had happened in that dusty lot behind the diner stayed behind. A reminder that even the toughest hearts could be softened by kindness, skill, and a little bit of courage. The hum of the car engine filled the quiet evening air as Sarah drove away from Ridgewood, the small town fading into the rearview mirror. Max and Luna were sprawled out in the backseat, their breathing slow and steady, clearly content after a long day. The sun had fully set now, leaving behind a blanket of stars that stretched across the darkened sky. Sarah glanced at them through the rearview mirror, her heart swelling with pride. They weren't just dogs, they were family, partners who had stood by her through thick and thin. Tonight, they had proven once again why she trusted them above all else. As the miles rolled by, Sarah replayed the events of the day in her mind. It wasn't often that she found herself in situations like this, confrontations born out of ignorance and bravado, but she couldn't deny that there was something satisfying about turning hostility into respect. The biker's initial mockery had stung, not because it was personal, but because it represented a larger issue: the constant need to prove herself in a world that often underestimated women in traditionally male-dominated fields. But tonight, she hadn't needed to shout or argue to make her point. Her actions, and her dog's incredible skills, had spoken louder than any words ever could. She thought about Razor and his gang, particularly the way their attitudes had shifted so dramatically over the course of a single afternoon. At first, they had been loud, dismissive, and quick to judge. By the end, though, they had been asking questions, offering apologies, and even showing genuine curiosity about her work. Change didn't always come easily, especially for people set in their ways, but Sarah knew that sometimes all it took was a little push, a demonstration of skill, patience, and mutual respect, to open someone's eyes. Her thoughts drifted to Tank, the hulking biker who had volunteered to be the target during the demonstration. She chuckled softly, imagining how flustered he must have felt when Max and Luna cornered him without breaking a sweat. He probably hadn't expected such precision and control from animals he'd dismissed as mere pets. That was the beauty of working with highly trained canines. They never fail to surprise people, even those who thought they'd seen it all. By the time Sarah reached the outskirts of the next town, fatigue began to creep in. She turned up the radio slightly, letting soft music fill the silence. Max lifted his head briefly, his ears twitching at the sound, before settling back down beside Luna. Sarah smiled, grateful for moments like these, peaceful stretches of road where it was just her and her dogs. No distractions, no challenges, just the rhythm of the journey ahead. As she pulled into a quiet motel parking lot to rest for the night, Sarah reflected on what the encounter meant to her. It wasn't about proving anything to the bikers. It was about staying true to herself and her values, even when faced with adversity. She had walked into that diner expecting nothing more than a simple meal, yet she had walked out having made an impact. Sometimes, life handed you opportunities to challenge stereotypes and break down barriers. And today, she had seized that chance. After checking into her room and settling Max and Luna onto their makeshift beds, Sarah sat by the window, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. She thought about the lessons she hoped the bikers had taken away from the experience, not just about respecting others, but also about teamwork, trust, and humility. In her line of work, those qualities weren't just important, they were essential. And if even one person left that diner with a new perspective, then the whole ordeal had been worth it. As sleep finally claimed her, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new roads, new challenges, and perhaps new encounters, but whatever lay ahead, she knew she wouldn't face it alone. With Max and Luna by her side, she was ready for anything. And as the night grew still, the only sounds filling the room were the gentle snores of her loyal companions, reminders that some bonds were unbreakable, no matter where life took them.